The communication skill as a learned skill is something that we do take for granted. That, and you know, again, going back to the work you do and the courses that you're teaching, they're fundamentals that you're sharing with people that truly help them become better leaders and better people. I believe that we do take it for granted. And most people, when they have a presentation to do, especially during the times we're in right now, they will not do much except maybe put a deck together. Maybe, right? Maybe. They won't rehearse it. They won't think about how they're going to present it. They're going to do what we say. What is the word that we all say? We're winging it.
Right.
I'm going to wing it.
Right.
Do you know what winging it comes from?
Yeah, I've butchered a couple keynotes and presentations. But I go, I know my topic. I'll just stand up and wing it.
Well, we're all guilty of it, by the way. I've done it too. But what winging it comes from is from the theater, right? Okay. And in the theater, you have the wings of the theater, which is where the actors wait behind on the side of the stage. And the understudy, not the star of the show, but the understudies would wait in the wings just for that chance that perhaps the main actor or the star would not feel well enough to go. I watched it happen when I actually saw Hamilton in New York, which was a huge deal. I took my daughter. The person who played Washington, George Washington, came out. The next scene, completely different actor. So that guy got to step up and take the role.
Cool. So that's the winging it.
They're winging it. They're getting to come in. But those people who are winging it, they've been rehearsing for this. They're waiting for their moment. What we're doing is we're not waiting for a moment. We're just throwing all caution to the wind. Can you imagine if that guy came out as Washington and just the whole show started to fall apart because they were just winging it?
Wow. You know, I think that's one of the greatest things that I've heard in a long time. And I love what you just sort of clarified for people, which is winging it requires preparation, practice, rehearsal. And without that, there ain't no winging it. You're just fucking it up.
Yeah, I think what people say when they say winging it, what they hope to be able to do is improvise. And improvisation is extraordinarily important, but you can only do great improvisation when you know your stuff. But when we're talking about true artistic improvisation, when we look at Miles Davis or look at Jimi Hendrix doing the Star Spangled Banner, for example, how could he do that? He knew the instrument. It was a part of him. He knew the song. He knew every note. He knew every beat, so that when he did go all over the place, he could always come back to where he needed to be. That's what great improvisation does. And that's where only when you know your content can you actually wing it.
And that's not just in a presentation form. That's in a meeting. That's in I talk a lot about this, which is, the importance of planning, which is we plan for all the useless shit in our life except the important stuff. I make a joke that you plan to go to the bathroom each morning, right? You wake up, you schedule it, you have your coffee, so whatever you do, right? You make the plan and then you go to the bathroom, or you plan your drive to the office or the drive to your destination. You're like, I have to go to a meeting tomorrow. I have to come. I'm doing a podcast. All right. What time am I going to leave? What should I wear? What's traffic going to be like? What direction I should take? Just think about how much effort you put into just driving here. Now you got to go have a conversation. You got to go have a conversation with someone that you work with. Someone on your team, a boss, a client, and everyone goes in, I'll wing it, right?
Yeah.
And it's the worst. This is where everything starts to go wrong and back to misunderstanding and miscommunication. Man, Nick, that was probably one of my moments this year, which is learning the difference between winging it, the true definition of winging it, and improv. Because I'm a big fan of improv. But it's one of the things I learned is you could only improv and do well when you actually know your content.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fundamental to the coaching that I do. Here's an example. When one of the leaders that I work with says, I'd rather not focus on it, but I've got to do a panel at Money 2020, or I've got to do a panel at Elevate, or whatever the conference is. I say, why don't you want to? Well, it's just a conversation. We don't really need to rehearse that. And I'll say, in all fairness, it's actually more important that you rehearse what you want to say in order to capture that moment that when you're on stage, your purpose shines through, your content shines through, your thought leadership shines through. Right. And so we will, it is kind of monotonous, right? You have to look at the messaging, you have to come back down to it, and then you have to pretend that you're having this interview well in advance. Now, I'm not saying that you memorize your content. I just want to be really clear. Yeah. Memory comes later if you're doing a keynote. There's great benefits to memorizing passages, and because the authenticity is very important. If you're starting to sound like you're reciting stuff, you lose the humanity of it. I think that we need to know our stuff, know what we want to say, and practice it.
Right.
And then, in a way, forget it.
Right.
Because it's going to come back to you. It will. It's imprinted in your memory.
Right.
Now, when I say forget it, I'm not saying like wipe it out like Jerry Seinfeld did. He said, I'm never performing that old material again. No, I mean actually relax and allow it to take its own way out and into the world. If you're trying to, remember the exact wording of something, you're going to start to sound like you're reciting something, and you don't want that.
Yeah. We call it script talk versus right talk.
Yeah. Oh, I love
that. Yeah. All days in presentation skills we used to teach us, which is, okay, write your script out or your presentation. Yeah. And you write it out, right? The problem is when you're trying to then deliver that after, it's artificial because you're basically sort of robotic and you're reading it. Yeah. Versus right talk is like basically bullet points that you put down. You take your whole paragraph and you break it down into a bunch of bullet points, and that gives you your reference for what you're talking and your scripting, right?
Absolutely.
So you're not having to read so much the paragraph versus knowing the main point you're trying to get across.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd like to point out about that is it's so bang on, and the challenge that many senior leaders have is those bullet points are handed to them.
Right.
And that's and this is kind of been an interesting journey for me as somebody who had a communications and events company, owned an agency, and worked with senior leaders, doing a little bit of coaching, but more on the communication advising and production. I would see come in to shoot a video, and we had would want to interview the CEO or the vice president, and the executive would be handed a piece of paper with all the bullet points. They look at it and they go, okay. And they'd circle if they're really good. They'd circle a few things, but the problem is it now just became sound bites that they had to memorize, and it wasn't their language. And there's ways that you can take that content. As long as they do the work, this is part of it. They do the work. They find the time. They think it through. They go through a process. So that their ideas, their articulation comes out, and it fits with the organizational purpose and values and the strategies.
Yeah, and you just said it there, indirectly, which is they were handed this sometimes as they're walking up, and there's no time to prep and plan and to rehearse and stuff. When you talk about rehearsal before, I remember it reminded me of a story of Tony Soprano, I forget his name, James Gandolfini. He was on a plane flying from wherever, call it LA to New York, or whatever the flight was, and he's sitting in business class, and all of a sudden he starts going berserk, right? Getting really aggressive, screaming, like just being really belligerent. They treat you very differently in first class when you start to misbehave, right? They come up and they speak to you like an adult. They say, excuse me, Nick, is everything okay, right? If you're in economy, they come up to you and say, hey, sir, all right, pipe down, otherwise we're going to have you arrested when we get home. Anyway, they're all, Mr. Gandolfini, is everything okay? What's going on? Are you all right? And he had his headphones on, and he looked up, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm in the midst of just rehearsing my lines for the next show.
Oh, awesome.
And he was in character, and he had his headphones on, and obviously got caught up in the moment and didn't realize how loud he was. But he was rehearsing. And anyway, everyone in that sort of section thought he was losing it. But that is the example of rehearsal and really getting into it and practicing it and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great story. He was such a great actor.
Brilliant actor.
And obviously so dedicated. Like I'd never heard about any of his prep. But it doesn't surprise me when you look at the product that he was able to deliver. Yeah. It's remarkable.
Well, look, I know as a speaker and as someone that teaches and trains and stands up in a lot of audiences, I do a far better job when I've taken taken time to prepare. And not that I need to learn my material. I know my stuff.
Yeah.
But I prepare for, all right, how long am I delivering for? What are my main sort of objectives here? Who's the audience right now? What stories am I going to tell?
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And it's not scripted, but it's sort of chunked out, and I might sort of go off in some tangent some way.
Yeah.
But I find that I'm able to be way more clear and concise and effective as a communicator when I've taken that time to plan. And I think that's just what you've described right now, which is knowing all these tools is one thing, but planning on how you're going to use them is another.
Absolutely. And so, the other benefit that you have, Greg, is you've got probably the 10,000 hours of practice that many people don't have. If you're the head of medical affairs at a pharma company or a director of marketing, likely you've done a lot of presentations, but not the 10,000 hours that is required to, and I'm, borrowing from Malcolm Gladwell's book, but that allow you to get that comfort in your content. I also want to bring up something that, you touched on Gandolfini's preparation. But that preparation is answering a question for him, which is, how do I want to show up? Like when he walks onto set, and wants to start working, he is ready. And this is kind of fundamental to some of the work that I do, which is, how do we start to think like a performer?
Yes.
And start to act like a performer, and ask yourself, especially in today's world where a lot of us are on Zoom or Teams or whatever virtual environment we're presenting from, how do I want to show up?
Right. So important.
Yeah, it's a toughie. It's a toughie because it's hard. We're moving at a great pace. Right. A lot of people are overwhelmed, and they don't have time to plan and prep the way they want to. Right. So I think it's one of those, terrible conundrums, right? Like, we need more from our people. We're getting more because there's tremendous productivity happening right now, as we've heard. But the engagement level is questionable.
Yeah. Look, I don't know if productivity has gone up just in general. I think productivity has remained consistent, but the work people have had to do to keep that consistent productivity is way more, because we are sitting at home. And look, I'm finding this in my own schedule, which is jumping from one thing to the next, like coming out of a training room, into a podcast, into a coaching session, into a meeting. It's hard to flip your brain, and that's kind of what's happening, I think, in some cases at home. Hey, I'm Greg Witz. Thanks so much for coming and checking out the video. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one, so I'd highly suggest that you click this video over here. And don't forget to subscribe and share.